This is Career Lab with Levi and Bobak, the podcast that features fascinating pathways to success and the people who have navigated their own journeys in the ever-changing and fast-paced modern economy. I'm Bobak Babahanian. Our guest this week is Anthony Miller, a TV news anchor turned head of internal communications for a Boston area tech company. We connect with Anthony on how he leveraged skills from one career to another. Find out if you have what it takes to leap into a new industry midstream on this edition of Career Lab with Levi and Bobak.
Welcome to Career Lab with Levi and Bobak. I'm Levi Maya in the main Lighthouse studio with Bobak Babahanian.
How are you?
I am well. How are you
doing well?
I am doing really well.
I'm great. I'm super excited for today. We're based out here in California on the West Coast, and we've got an East Coast guest, and you know how that brings you back to my roots. So I'm always excited when we can tap into the other coast.
We're keeping these East Coasters up late, though. I mean, we tape it like 6:30, 7 usually, and you know these guys put in a long, hard day, and we're keeping them up past their bedtime. But we've got a great guest tonight.
Yeah, I'm super excited about today's guest. Anthony Miller works in the world of internal communications, and we know what you're thinking. You know what the heck does that mean? Well, Anthony works with leaders in mid-sized organizations to get their message and strategy out to their employees. He's been in that field for nearly 10 years, and prior to that, he was a local news TV reporter and anchor. Full disclosure, Anthony and I worked for the CBS News affiliate in Charleston, South Carolina together. He's a husband and father, but maybe most importantly, a cautiously optimistic Buffalo Bills fan. Anthony, thanks so much for joining Career Lab with Levi and Bobak.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Yes, cautiously optimistic is as far as I'll go these days, as far as my Bills are concerned.
I know you and I could talk for 30 minutes about the Bills and my Eagles, but we'll save that for a completely different show.
All right.
So, Levi, one of the things that really interests me about Anthony was he made the switch, what I call, that a lot of people have done, from journalism to a different side. You know, Anthony, take us through
the dark side.
The dark side. Why did you make that switch, and why did it feel like that time was the right time?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I did that for 10 years as a local news television and anchor and reporter. And ultimately, what started happening was, and Bob, you can probably relate to this a little bit, I'd be at a job and you work, if you don't know about how these jobs work, you work on a contract basis. So it's 2 to 3 years of a contract. And I'd be like halfway through my contract and be like, oh, this station sucks, man. I cannot wait till my contract's up and I can get to the next place. And I'd get to the next place and I'd get about halfway through the contract and I'd be like, oh my God, this place is horrible. But the next place, and then I realized, I was like, it's not the next place. It's ultimately it's me. This is not the thing that I want to do for a long period of time. So I was in Boston, and I had already made the decision before I got to Boston that I thought I was done with that business. But I wanted to give it one last shot, right? It was like Boston's where I went to school. And I got there and it was just the same thing. And I was like, eventually I'm going to start, yearning for that next city. And ultimately it was, as far as, it's very interesting because it's a profession where you tell people, I was a television reporter, their eyes light up. Really? That must have been really cool. And it really isn't. When you do hard news, you typically meet people on the worst day of their lives. Something really bad has happened if I've shown up, for the most part. I mean, sometimes it's lighter news, but by and large, those live trucks are outside your house, something bad has happened. You're asking them to bare their soul on television. It's bad hours. I worked nights for 10 years. I worked every weekend for 10. I was a weekend anchor, and then I was a weekend reporter for 10 years, every holiday. And then, it's really interesting. I'm originally from Buffalo, but when I got to Boston, I worked in all pretty much southern cities. And I forgot, I didn't realize and understand snow coverage. And then you're like out in those elements, and it was all that. And I didn't have a great kind of life outside of it. I wouldn't say I had a great life in it, but it just got to a point where it was like, all right, I can keep chasing this happiness, or I can try to find it somewhere else. And that's how I ended up in internal communications.
For those that don't know, take us through what internal communications is. What's that day-to-day like for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is another one where I'll tell people what I do, and they're just like, "Oh, that's interesting." So typically, it is medium-sized to large organizations, often global companies that have this type of department where you are basically the voice of kind of the leaders in the organization, helping them get their message out to the employees, whatever that message is, whatever the strategy is, in a way that is consumable, in a way that is entertaining, and in a way that will spur not only action, but inspire and keep people kind of with their eye on the ball, for lack of a better term. I mean, my day to day, if I write a lot, I write an awful lot. Lately, I'm trying to give a lot of that up to my direct report and doing more strategic thinking around how to better reach employees. For instance, right now I'm doing some work on trying to figure out if we want to create like a persona for folks within our organization that allows us to get to know our audience a little bit better. So it's those sorts of like strategic things, communications plannings. For instance, if someone comes to me and says, we have this important thing that we're rolling out in 3 months, it's never 3 months, I'm lying. It's like tomorrow. They never give me that type of time. It's coming up with a communications plan that suits that message. And for me, it's plan up until that date, and then it's promotion after that date to keep it on the minds of folks. So it's those sort of things. My news background kind of lends this. I am more or less the host of most of our all company meetings. Some guy said to me once, he's like, "You're like the Ryan Seacrest of our organization." I was like, that is the weirdest thing anyone has ever said to me, but I guess it makes sense. And it's, Bob, you kind of know this. It's very odd. I would say I'm probably as visible as most people in our organization, because again, every time we have a meeting, they see literally what you're seeing right now. And I'll go to the offices and people walk by like they know you, but I don't know them. But they're always like, "Hey, Anthony, how you doing?" I'm like, hey man, hey, good to see you.
Hey, you.
But you enjoy that, right? I mean, you enjoy that, 'cause that brings you back to your news days a little bit.
So you're like a little bit of a local celebrity around the office.
Yeah, I don't want to say that.
It's too late. It's too late.
That's really super weird.
So I think when I think about internal communications, I'm wondering, why does an organization need help communicating to people inside their organization? Usually you think about external communications when you think about a PR person and they're trying to get everyone else to be on board with the company message. But what do you do internally, and why does the company need that for communicating within?
Well, it's the same idea. Ultimately, I see our employees as kind of like our audience and our customers, for lack of a better term. And I'll take it one step back a little bit. You know, your let's say your CFO or your chief financial officer, right? They know numbers. They don't know story, right? They don't know narrative, right? So they're good at that thing. Everyone's good at one thing or another, but it seems to be there aren't, outside of the marketing organization, but they're working on marketing the product externally. So it's the same sort of thing where you need someone to kind of tell your story and kind of be your advocate, and knowing how to tell a story, knowing how to do these sorts of things, getting in front of people and telling that story is not a skill that everybody has. I remember when I was leaving television, what I did was I just kind of networked with a few people just to understand their jobs. And I forget the guy's name, but he had worked in television before, and he was like, the thing you do that, like, okay, I can take this very difficult thing and turn it into 90 seconds that people can understand. He was like, people in the corporate world they don't have that muscle, and you've been exercising it for 10 years. So it's that sort of thing where and I run into this now where I'm like, you are really talking executive at a high level about very difficult concepts to grasp, and you grasp it because you're in it all the time. You need me to translate, because not everybody is working at this level. So it's a similar sort of thing where you're trying to, it sounds weird to promote the company to the people who work for the company, but ultimately at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're doing.
I feel like communications is a popular major. It's a popular interest for folks. It's broad, it's general.
Yeah.
What are some of the strengths that you think, you have or people it really helps them to enter this field, knowing that there's so many different parts of communication, right? But are there a couple common traits that you think younger folks, it's important for them to have?
I'm going to sound like a broken record. I don't want to say storytelling, right? Because that sounds almost kind of weird. Like I weave a tale, but I would say it's the writing. Having that skill to be able to write, it's a skill to be able to kind of manage a couple of different kind of projects that may take a while, but kind of juggle those at the exact same time. The ability to listen and the ability to not take things personal as it relates to you put your all in and you write something and you send it to somebody, a leader, and they're like, this is all wrong, or this is not what I want. And you got to go back to the drawing board. You're not bad. It's just, you haven't hit it at the first time. So it's kind of having that short memory as far as that's concerned, in addition to all those other traits.
What advice would you have for someone looking to get into this field of communications?
Oh, that's a great question, and a question that I get more often than not from folks who are looking to escape the other profession that I was in. Ask it one more time, Bob. I'm sorry.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone looking to get into this? I think people just think, communications. Yeah, I can do that. Right. But as you spoke to it, there's so many different pieces to it.
I would say, yes, communicate like first off, communications is so broad, and it's like, okay, like if you are younger and you have the ability to maybe go and intern at an organization, I know it's easier said than done, but like really getting some experience, kind of seeing kind of the day-to-day of how internal communications work, how the PR organization works, external comms, for lack of a better term. I would say do some of that, independent of being able to, more or less get a job at one of these places. It's sharpening that writing tool, just write. I'd say what I do is I do a lot of reading as well. I keep an eye on how people communicate outside of the workplace. So, think about how you might be able to sell a message. Those sorts of things I think are good ways to get started. But I maybe do some of the stuff that I did, go out, again, easy to say, go get an internship, right? But if short of that, find people and just have conversations with them and understand what their job is like and figure out what you like or what you don't like about it, and go for there. That's how I found internal communications. Most people who leave TV go into PR or marketing or something like that. And I didn't necessarily want to do that. And I met a woman who did internal comms, and I was like, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same. You and I had a little bit of similar paths. Mm-hmm. And, when I made that switch, I think, it took all the parts of the position that I liked and left behind a lot of the pieces that I didn't. Especially salary, and and that just worked. And I think it's funny and I know you were talking internal communications now, but we've got an audience tuned in that's also interested in that other TV side. Like it's really hard to start even getting a job in TV. And I started in Missoula, Montana, right? You've got to start in a place that you've probably never been to. I was making, and this is a long time ago, but I was making $18,000 a year before taxes. I was eating, bologna sandwiches 6 days a week, and you just do what you have to do. I think I get that. I get that a lot, and it's, you're right. It's a switch that a lot of journalists make. And I don't want to say you look back at not wanting to do it because it was the right move. I wish I'd have done it a little earlier, but it's the same, but it's different.
You said you guys talked. Anthony mentioned about how the storytelling that you needed for TV news was really helpful in being succinct and getting messaging across internally or even for external communications, just in the PR world. What other aspects of the job, Anthony, do you think from broadcast journalism TV prepared you for your work in corporate and internal comms?
Yeah, I think it's well, obviously the presentation skills, right? Like that gives me kind of a skill that it's interesting. I help colleagues will come to me and say, hey, can we sit down and talk about, can you look at my presentation? And I give them tips, but I'm also like, here's what I think you do, but there's also some 10,000 hours going on with that with me where, I, especially later in my career where it was like you were just on live television every night and you were talking off the top of your head on live TV. And that's just something that people who are in the corporate world aren't going to get that type of experience. So there's that. I think I alluded to it earlier. There is this idea that, not necessarily. I call storytelling and what I'm about to say two different things. Kind of this idea that you can make this complex thing very consumable for people. That I can't tell you how many times I got like a budget or something like when I was in TV news and it was like I got to turn this into 90 seconds of TV, and you go and you can figure out the important parts and you can put it together. I guess that's kind of storytelling, but that's one thing that I think is really important. And I challenge stakeholders, right? They'll come to me and say, all right, I need every little bit of this in the message. And I'll be like, all right, well, let's talk about what we're trying to achieve here first. And then it's like, all right, let me take what is the most important thing, because if you include everything in there, you're not going to get anybody's attention because it's going to be a 6-page email and nobody's going to read it. So how do we make this something that people actually want to sit down and read? So there's that. I think lead writing, I think, is something that helps. When you're in television news and to kind of if you don't know the lingo, lead is like that first sentence in a story, right? And it's when you're in TV news and print journalism, right? It's how you catch people, but especially in television news, right? Like it's like make sure they don't want to turn the channel, and you got to hit them really off the top with something. I think I take that approach to writing emails and messages in that way. Like I really have to get people's attention. So that sort of thing. I'm trying to think what else I may have brought. The ability to work with different types of personalities on any given day. When you're in television news, my situation was you're working with a photographer, a different camera operator every day, and it's a different type of person every day, and you're working very close with that person. So being able to work with those different types of personalities, I think absolutely helped. I don't get too high or too low around relationships because I used to, work in a very stressful industry with people who weren't necessarily like me, and I had to work very closely with them. So that sort of thing.
What about when you said in the corporate world, people don't have this experience of having to be on camera or to think on their feet. Is this nature? I'm trying to figure out nature versus nurture. Can someone learn this, or were you just born to be on TV?
Yeah, no, we talked about it before we started filming. I was really, really bad at first. When I was in college and I was on that radio station, I was bad. It was horrible. My student news director pulled me aside one day and was like, "You gotta get." But I wasn't getting paid for it. It was she's like, you're all I have. You just have to get better. And I do think it's just that repetition over and over and over again helps. Like I would say I'm better at like facilitating all company meetings now than I was a couple of years ago, even though I came with all that skill beforehand. And here's what I will say. I'll preface that by saying anybody who worked in that business has like a performance gene. Bob has it. For sure. So there is a part that, like, I tell people all the time, don't like use what you have. Don't try to like recreate something that I have done in the past. Like, and I think part of my success, at least in presentation, is that performance gene. Like I enjoy like doing stuff like this.
It's funny you talked about, you made that joke earlier that I caught of, it'd be great to have 3 months to work on a communication plan, but you usually find out the day before. That's what news was, right? You'd get to work in the morning, and we'd sit around at that meeting, and you'd get a story idea, and you'd be in the car, and you'd be on the way to this story idea, and then you'd get a call about, we had this different thing that you need to go to, and your deadline's the same, and we actually need you to do a couple more things in addition to that, and you do this every day, and you have to work. There was no like, well, I may be late. I may not get the story in time, so there's going to be 90 seconds of just color bars during the news. That wasn't an option. So I think that's
you got to make slot.
Yeah, that really helps, right? That really helps when you get into, because and even for me, doing what I do now, it feels like this is a rush. But I try to think back to the TV days and like, it was always worse.
Yeah. I try not to get too overwhelmed with certain things because, like, it's like, I've been in stickier situations than this. Like
when a horse falls in a lake. Yeah, Anthony had to cover when a horse falls.
No, it wasn't
in a
a
lake.
horse. It was a deer.
It was a deer. Sorry, and it was a deer.
That was big local news.
Yeah.
It was in Charleston. It was enormous. This deer was running through the streets, and it ended up in the lake.
So I'm trying to put together the whole backstory here. You guys worked together in Charleston on local news there,
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you went your separate ways. You came to Santa Barbara.
I did. I was in TV in Charleston, and I made the move to a healthcare system doing PR at a hospital.
Okay.
And then around that time, I think Anthony had left and gone down to do TV in Tampa.
That's right.
So you hung in there with TV a little bit longer, and then ultimately made the switch directly into internal comms at a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I got lucky that my boss at my first internal comms gig loved hiring people out of TV for the reason you're kind of talking about, Bob, like the ability to like shift and not be like thrown by it and be able to make deadline. Like, you kind of live that life for 10 years. So, yep.
Yeah, everyone says
I did television for 10 years, 9 years. Bob, I feel like you were shorter.
On air? Yeah.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, it went a little bit longer.
Yeah, you went a little bit longer. Yep.
Yeah. I'm curious, you pick up nuggets along the way, right? And there's always things you say, I wish I would have known this back at the beginning. Is there anything that you have that you're like, if I would have just known this when I first started, it would have made things a little bit easier. Anything you can pass on to our listeners, a little gold just for them. Oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what I want to say here. And giving you enough dead air that you can edit this pause. You mean like in internal comms?
In anything. It could be internal comms. It could be in just overall careers, in what you love to do, what you want to do.
Yeah, I would say kindness goes a long way. I wish I would have known that earlier in my career. It's very interesting. I recently was at an internal communications conference, and Solette O'Brien was talking at this conference. She was like the keynote, so it was like interesting to me to hear her story. And I remember her telling this story about like her being 23 years old and an anchor in San Francisco. So immediately I'm like, oh, you rose really, really fast, really, really early, and how she was telling the story. She's like, well, everybody hates me anyway, so I don't care. And I was like, that's because you were not kind. And I was like, I don't know who Soledad is, but if you're in a television station and everybody hates you and everybody like hates you, and and further, you don't care that they hate you, that's kind of that cutthroaty kind of, I need to make it to the top, that I will admit I had some of that in Charleston. There are things that I said and did like back then as an anchor, that I wish I hadn't. And I think that type of kindness, it makes you a better person. You're not as stressed out about stuff because you're like, everybody's just trying their best here. So I would say just being a bit more kind. I wish I'd have known that ahead of time. And I thought I was, but if I look back and I think about some of the things, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed.
You were always nice to me. Yeah. You let me stay at your house when my apartment had bats.
That's right.
I mean,
old stately Wayne Manor is what I called your apartment.
Yeah,
after you had the bats, Batman. Yes. Yes, we were boys, but there were moments in that newsroom. I don't want to get too, I don't want to bring up too much, but there were moments where I could have been nicer. I'll say that for sure.
One of the things that I think we're going to try to ask people when starting now when they're on the show is, how do you feel AI is going to impact your industry? It's kind of scaring everybody out there, I think, in some sense. Mid-career folks are thinking like, oh my gosh, am I going to be replaced? Early career and people who are just entering the field are wondering if that job's going to be around in a year or 2 or 5. What do you see changing in internal comms as AI becomes more powerful?
I wish I knew, because I wish I could get ahead of what's coming. I have, from the start, ChatGPT and these other things, it's like, oh, so that thing can write something that is, legible in 30 seconds, something that might take me like an hour or two. Like that is just scary on its face, right? And again, I went to a conference recently, and this was like a big talking point. And I left there with 2 things that I thought was smart. The one guy made the comparison to Excel. He said when Excel came out, people who were bookkeepers were like, oh my gosh, this computer program is going to take my job because it's a spreadsheet and it can do all these things really quickly and the things that I get paid to do. And they said ultimately the bookkeepers who learned how to use Excel stuck around, and the ones who were afraid of it and didn't want to work with it, they kind of fell by the wayside. And I thought that was interesting. So part of me says, okay, let's figure out how to utilize this thing. I think it will probably be able to do 98% of the things that we do pretty well. But I think those of us, hopefully I'm in this group, who learn how to utilize it in a way that enhances what they do, will kind of make it. I don't think that they're going to replace all of us with chatbots. Don't think. I think there's a human. Even when I read some of the stuff, I'm like, yeah, this is good, but it still kind of feels. And oh, by the way, that's going to get better, right? It's going to get better and better, and become more and more human. But I think companies that really want to stay on top, I don't think they necessarily want to replace all their people with, people who do the types of jobs that I do with AI. For me, it's like, okay, how can I utilize it to write headlines or write like blurbs, like quickly, these things that, I can go back to thinking about my first internal comms job when we would do like headline meetings and we would like brainstorm headlines. We'd be writing them on the whiteboard. Like, okay, if there's something that can take that away and make that a little bit better, I think that's a good thing. But like I said, and all of this very clearly, I'm guessing, right? Who the hell knows?
So is this a bad time to tell you that Levi actually is produced by ChatGPT?
No, that's unfortunate.
I'm not a real person. I'm just a
man.
chatbot. Yeah. A figment of Bob's imagination.
We got bigger problems if that's true.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
No, I've had a similar experience with AI. I've incorporated it into my workflow, but like you said, sort of as a very advanced intern who can be a creative sounding board, but not someone who you're going to who the customer's just going to plug into and then get output that they can use.
And, from my point of view, here's what's interesting about, they'll figure out governance, right? But it's like, how much do you know if you are company X and you're using it for just internal communications? That means you're putting like financial results, like proprietary information that you may not necessarily want out in the world, where yes, a hacker can get into my computer, right? Obviously, but you just don't know how secure it will be in the long term. So how much of that do you just want to input into a system and, for the convenience of that, where you can maybe feel a bit more secure if it's a person? I don't know. It's very interesting. I have a direct report who her goal that weekend that we were at that conference, that week, it wasn't a weekend, that would be weird. That week we were at that conference was to like get me to stop being skeptical about AI. And it was funny, right? I was like, okay. I was like, all right, I can see some value in it. But she'll never see this. She's new. She's early in her career, and we have like writing kind of workshops, for lack of a better term, where I go over her writing, and it's very clear that she doesn't write in like Word or anything. She writes somewhere else where there isn't spell check. And I said to her, I was like, why don't you use the original AI spell check? I was like, it will make my job a little bit easier, and it will improve upon some of the stuff. And she was like, very funny, but it's true. That's the same idea, right? To a much lesser extent.
Last question from me, Anthony. What with your job right now, day to day, what's that one thing that you love? What's that one thing that motivates you? The one thing that gives you that rush?
Oh man, I'll tell you today. I was talking to. I'll tell you what it is, and why I love my company, who shall remain nameless. But I love being able to. Well, I'm going to use the example because I'm not going to be able to tell it correctly. I'm working with someone in our security area, right? Like cybersecurity, for lack of a better term, and they need to get out like information about policies, privacy policy, like really, I want to say boring but important things. And I was like, we can't play this straight. I was like, this has got to be the craziest writing that we do. I was like, I enjoy trying to find a way to make the most boring thing that people hate to read something that they'll read. I go back to when I first started at the company and we were implementing a new HR system that people weren't happy about. And I turned it into there's probably some IP stuff. I probably shouldn't say this, but whatever. I turned it into a Taken, the movie Taken with Liam Neeson. Yeah. It was this website, this, product has a set of very particular skills that can help you. And it was ridiculous, right? But like people were like replying, they were like, this is the best HR email I've ever read in my entire life. And when that happens, I've won.
That's beautiful.
That's awesome.
That's what I love about the job. Like being able, like it's like you hit singles and maybe a double here and there, but being able to stay at bat and hit that really crazy home run inside the park number, that's just kind of wild and interesting. That's what I love about what I do. And the fact that I get an opportunity to do it is great too. Because some companies wouldn't let me kind of turn a HR system into a email about Taken with GIFs and everything. It was ridiculous.
Anthony, thank you for taking time to be with us here. I know it's getting late in your neck of the woods, so appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you. Take care, Anthony.
Another great show, Bob.
Yeah.
We did it.
Super excited. 2 down?
2 down, many more to go, hopefully. We've got a bunch of really good guests in the queue, so stay with us on our channel here. You can visit careerlabpodcast.com, and that'll take you to all the ways to watch and listen to Career Lab with Babak and Levi. So stay with us, look for some new episodes, and we'll be seeing you real soon.